everybody. We're going to get started. I know a lot of people basically believe in Hawaiian time, but I think we waited long enough. How many people are familiar with John McDougall from California? His theory was reverse disease in blank days. He basically started in the state of Hawaii, and he sold his practice to Terry Shintani for $1. How many people have heard of Terry Shintani here in Hawaii? Linda Carney is reverse disease in blank days from Texas. The same mindset. So hopefully we'll learn not only what we've heard before, but something in addition. We are very fortunate that Linda basically is being sponsored by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii. She will be giving a talk to them that's going to be slightly different. There'll be less spiritual guidelines and information in it. On Tuesday, between 7 and 8:30 p.m., this is going to be at the Alawai Golf Course Clubhouse. She will also be giving a talk on Thursday, June 13th at Cameron Center on Maui at 7 to 8:30. Right now, before we go into a further bio and curriculum vitae of Dr. Carney, let's recognize three people. First of all, the first person to be recognized is Lorraine, our president of the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii. The second person we're going to recognize is Sheen Carney, the husband of our guest lecturer this afternoon. Is he here? And the third person is Linda, our guest speaker herself. So, let's talk briefly about our speaker. When I first looked at her bio, I was a little confused and had many questions. It was 2 paragraphs. It didn't say anything typical. So I started to ask questions and then ended up going online. What I found was the material of her curriculum vitae, her practice of medicine, and her bibliography. I condensed it down to a handout. You have a copy here, and it's 4 typed pages. A very prestigious bio, to say the least. So, Dr. Carney basically received her Bachelor of Arts in biology with a minor in biochemistry from Andrews University. Her medical degree was obtained through Loma Linda University School of Medicine in Loma Linda, California. Her postdoctorate training was in emergency medicine residency, and Loma Linda University Medical Center is where she fulfilled it. She is a licensed and board certified by the American Board of Emergency Medicine, that's the ABEM, Board Certified American College of Lifestyle Medicine, ACLM, licensed to practice medicine in Texas, California, and, believe it or not, the state of Hawaii. She's had several hospital appointments and recommendations, but she gave up most of her practice to practice in healing medicine. And if you know anything about John McDougall or Terry Shintani in reversing disease in blank days, like most of us do, this is how Linda currently practices. So, with that said, I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight, Linda Carney.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Foster, for that glowing introduction. I am grateful. As we start this important topic, would you be willing to bow your heads with me and let's ask the Lord's blessing. Heavenly Father, we praise you because you are our healer. Hide your speaker behind your cross, Lord, and let the people be healed. Amen. I'm grateful to my husband, Sean Carney, for coming with me and making PowerPoints possible in my life. I'm grateful to the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii for flying me here and sharing me with Honolulu Central. Thank you, each one, for coming. And we're going to talk about mood, food, and health. Which foods will give us the best health? Which foods will give us the best fitness? Well, the right food has the most fiber in it, and fiber is not found in meat, dairy, eggs, or oil. And when I say meat, I mean chicken, fish, seafood. So what's the connection between fitness, which we all want more of, fiber, and hormones, which we all want in balance? Basically, the message is simple. What we're going to talk about today is the more fiber, the more fit. And this is illustrated by a study by Dr. Cummings in 2018. It was just published. And it was talking about Dr. Dennis Burkitt. And he was a missionary surgeon to Africa. And he's famous for showing us the etiology. So who knows what etiology means? That means the cause, the etiology of a pediatric cancer called Burkitt's lymphoma. And what Dr. Burkitt found out was that the more fiber, the more health. And we're going to talk about the more fiber, the more testosterone a man will have, and the right balance a woman will have for her testosterone. So everybody wants to be more fit. People are fighting their weight, especially. We have an obesity epidemic in the United States. And what about fiber? Why is it only found in unprocessed plant foods? We're going to talk today about 8 lifestyle factors so that you can reduce your risk for cancer. Thank you to Dr. Ruth Heydrich for inviting me to come to Hawaii, for footing the bill that Sean and I could come over. We're grateful to the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii. She is a breast cancer survivor. If you haven't read the book, Race for Life, you should read that book. That is her story of how she went from a breast cancer patient who had breast cancer spread all over in her liver. She was only 42 years old, and she changed her diet. And here she is at a beautiful age. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say how, you would not believe. 84, wow. Wow, God is good. And she's still running and racing and speaking about the power of a plant-based diet. This is a woman who has run the Ironman triathlon. She is a triathlete. And so we're going to talk about how the right food can reduce your risk for diabetes type 2 and overweight, anxiety, depression, and the problems with women's health, such as dysfunctional uterine bleeding. This is so common. Many women after age 35 bleed and bleed and bleed, heavier and heavier, more and more frequent until they need procedures. And my goal in life is to prevent unnecessary hysterectomies. And then, of course, it's graduation weekend, and we've got some young people here. And we want to help young people to find out how they can avoid premenstrual syndrome and premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So, we're going to talk about fiber. Fiber is our friend, and there are 2 kinds of fiber, soluble and insoluble. So when you think about how to figure out the difference between them, soluble fiber swells up when you cook it, like rice, brown rice and oats. And it stabilizes glucose levels. So glucose, that's the simplest form of carbohydrate. That's the only fuel the brain can use. And fiber is sticky. And so the glucose molecules stick to the fiber, and it releases slowly, little bit at a time, just right, instead of having spikes of glucose that can be inflammatory and can lead to cancer through IGF-1. And soluble fiber lowers your cholesterol. So the more fiber, the less you have to take those medicines that lower cholesterol. And insoluble fiber cleans out your colon. It does not swell up in water, but it prevents constipation. And did you know that constipation is associated with varicose veins? So ladies, if you want your legs looking lovely, start with a high fiber diet when you're young, and they can avoid varicose veins. Fiber makes you feel full, and yet it adds no calories, and that makes fiber the weight loss wonder. The more foods with fiber, the more you can eat more, weigh less. Dr. Dennis Burkitt said, the less fiber, the more disease. He studied rates of colon cancer in Africa, and he found that the more fiber in the diet, the lower the incidence of colon cancer. And I want to add to that about hormones. The less fiber in the diet, the worse your estrogen imbalance. And we're not just talking about women. It's for men too, because men make estrogen just as women make testosterone, although of course women have more estrogen and men have more testosterone. So the less fiber, the more estrogen, and the less testosterone. So as estrogen levels go up, disease rates go up. As estrogen levels goes up, a man's testosterone level goes down. And it's sort of an epidemic. You hear about low testosterone all the time, whereas when I was growing up 59 years ago, you didn't hear about this. So your question, your natural question might be, why? Why the less fiber, the more estrogen? And Dr. Golden to the rescue, there is a study published way back in 1994, the effect of dietary fat and fiber on serum estrogen concentrations. So fiber is a sponge for estrogen. Now, the liver is a washing machine, and 24/7, the liver is taking things out of the blood that it doesn't want there, and it's sending them down a little tube called the bile duct, and it's dumping the estrogen into the intestines, where it's hoping for a sponge called fiber to soak up the excess estrogen and carry it out with the solid waste. Aren't you glad that it's not your job to figure out how much estrogen there is in the content of stool? Because did you know that vegans have way higher estrogen content in their stool than people who don't eat a completely plant-based diet? So, fiber removes estrogen. It's a sponge. And if there isn't enough fiber in the diet, the intestinal villi, those little finger-like projections that line the inside of the intestine, they're absorbing things, all the good nutrients, but they're absorbing the estrogen that didn't get absorbed if you didn't have enough fiber. And back into the circulation it goes. And there's a word for this medically. It's called enterohepatic circulation. Entero means intestines, hepatic means liver. And so back into the bloodstream that estrogen goes, where it can cause a host of problems, including cancer, but not just cancer. And so this study by Dr. Rose, published way back in 1991, said that high-fiber diets reduce serum estrogen concentrations. Kiala, do I have it too close to my mouth? Are we good? We're good? Okay. All right. So fiber is our estrogen sponge, and the more fiber, the more estrogen is excreted in the stool, as shown by this study. This is a long time ago, way back in 1972 by Dr. Aries. And insufficient estrogen removal is a problem. And Dr. King analyzed dietary fiber trends from 1999 to 2008. And he found, quote, a Western diet is unlikely to bind estrogen to fiber, permitting reabsorption of the estrogen into the bloodstream. So it's been a long time, about 40 years now, that we've known that estrogen is going to be too high if fiber is insufficient. And remember, fiber is only found in the unprocessed plant. So what's wrong with estrogen? And am I against estrogen? No, last time I checked, still a woman, not against estrogen, but the estrogen that we produce inside our bodies, both men and women produce it. Estrogen is a growth promoter. Without estrogen, no fetus would grow, no breast would grow, no cancer would grow. And when estrogen is overproduced, it can promote growth out of control. And what do we call growth out of control? We call it cancer. And this is a study by Dr. Russo, the role of estrogen in the initiation of breast cancer. And you might think, well, yeah, breast cancer, we can understand how that's associated with estrogen. Some breast cancers are estrogen receptor positive or progesterone receptor positive. But we're actually finding that excess estrogen is a factor in the breast cancers that are not even positive for the hormone receptors. And other kinds of cancers too, thyroid, colon, brain cancer. So if we increase dietary fat, and I'm talking about all the fats, but especially oil, which has no fiber, we raise our estrogen inside of us, and we raise our cancer risk. In fact, a high-fat diet increased the risk for breast cancer 18% in the Harvard Nurses' Health Study too. But if those women were post-menopausal, it was 21%. So excess estrogen is also a factor in PMS and PMDD, because this is when the estrogen is the highest that it ever gets in the monthly cycle in the non-pregnant female. And this has a great implication for the woman's moods. Look at these beautiful twins. They're vegans, Nina and Randa Nelson, and they wrote a book called The Clear Skin Diet. And in the first picture where you can see the cystic acne, They were vegan, and a vegan diet is good, but a vegan diet is not enough if it's high in oils, nuts, and seeds. But they achieve the skin that they want, and they're out to help people everywhere achieve the skin that they want. We want to avoid dysfunctional uterine bleeding. We want to avoid depression and anxiety, and we want to avoid diabetes type 2. Many people wonder, is it the sugar in my diet that is causing me to be diabetic? But no, it isn't. It's true that diabetes type 2 makes it harder for you to metabolize the sugars that you eat, but it's a high-fat diet that contributes the most to diabetes type 2. And animal protein does so also. It blocks the little doorways into the muscle cell so that the glucose stays inside the blood vessel, turning the artery wall sticky like cotton candy. And a sticky artery wall plaques up with atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis is the slow plugging of the artery, and 1 out of every 2 of us in this country dies of the complications of atherosclerosis. So that's why it's really important to eat a diet that is free from animal protein, low in fats, free from oils. All right. More fiber, less heart disease. Back in the 1950s, Ansel Keys started his famous 7-country study. And he found that it was about coronary artery disease, but he found that every additional 10 grams of fiber per day reduced the risk of fatal coronary heart disease by 17%. And this study was no slouch. It was 40 years of follow-up. And along came Dr. Ken Carroll from the University of Western Ontario in the 1970s. He studied Ansel Keys' data, and he went one further. He correlated the intake of animal fat in the diet with breast cancer. And then along came Dr. T. Colin Campbell. And he took Ken Carroll's data. You can see that certain countries are known for low-fat diets, and they had less cancer, breast cancer cases, and certain countries are associated with high-fat diets, and they had way more breast cancer. And then T. Colin Campbell said the correlation held true not just for dietary fat, but for animal protein in the diet. The more animal protein in the diet, what? Even skim milk? Yeah. Even yogurt? Yeah. Eggs? Egg white? No fat in the egg white? Yes. The more animal protein, the more cancer. So let's talk about the problems of estrogen dominance. Why am I so eager to help you to understand that excess estrogen is not your friend? Well, besides cancer, there's heavy vaginal bleeding, high blood pressure, blood clots, which can go to the eye, and suddenly you wake up blind and you never see again in that eye, strokes, blood clots in the leg, blood clots in the lung, and cysts of the ovary and breast, uterine fibroids, which can rub and cause excess bleeding. So how is estrogen like fire? A little bit of fire in the right place is a good thing, but too much fire, out of control, can be a disaster. Estrogen promotes cell growth, and growth is good if you're a baby, but overgrowth is not good if you're a cell destined to become a fibroid tumor or a cyst of the breast or ovary. And overgrowth is not good for a cell lining the inner uterus, that's called endometrium, endo means inside, that thickens the endometrium into heavy bleeding or cancer. You can think of estrogen like fertilizer. Estrogen promotes cell growth. And so, estrogen is like lawn fertilizer, making cells grow. Too much estrogen promotes too much growth, and overgrowth of cells is called cancer. Okay, so you got that point. Now, let's talk about heavy vaginal bleeding. Endometrial thickening is more common after age 35. That's the inner lining of the uterus. The estrogen levels are too high, and the progesterone levels are too low. Well, what lowers progesterone? How did they get too low of progesterone? Were they just born that way? No. The more estrogen in their bloodstream, the more a signal is sent to the ovaries to shut down production. You see, every body fat cell in our body, for a man or a woman, can produce estrogen. You don't have to have ovaries to produce estrogen. That's why men have it. And so the body fat cells produce high estrogen levels, and this causes the ovaries to get a signal, hey, shut down the production of hormone. There's too much estrogen. So the ovaries shut down production. But the only place that you can get progesterone is from the ovary. So when the progesterone is low, the bleeding is unregulated and heavy. Here we see the female uterus, and if estrogen is like lawn fertilizer, then progesterone is like a lawn mower. Estrogen promotes growth of the plush blood lining called the endometrium. Remember, endo means inside. And progesterone regulates the flow of blood out. So, lawn mower, that's progesterone. If you have excess estrogen, it could lead to anemia, and you can feel too weak to exercise, get a lot of headaches, and that can lead to hysterectomy, that's surgical removal of the uterus. Now, removal of the uterus is not the end of the world, but it could mean that intimacy is less pleasurable. Tissues are narrow, drier, more fragile, less able to accommodate. And this is a problem in marriages. You know, the woman hits her 40s, he's still got that gleam in his eye, he's still got his needs, and it's hurting her, and she doesn't want it, and that's hard on a marriage. The lack of uterine secretions flowing through could mean that infections are more likely. And of course, hysterectomies are expensive, painful, and you lose time from work. So let's take a look at the chemical structure of cholesterol, estrogen, and testosterone. You can see that all these sterol compounds have a backbone of carbon rings. That's the sterol backbone. And you can see how easily they look like each other and can get changed in the body into each other. Now, who knows where we find cholesterol in the diet? Where is cholesterol found? Cholesterol is only found in meat, dairy, and eggs. And when I say meat, I mean fish, and I mean chicken, and I mean seafood. And so if we take in dietary cholesterol, we're going to turn it in to excess estrogen and suppress a man's testosterone. And isn't that a great argument for keeping the animal protein, the eggs and the cheese out of your life? So I would like to give a shout out to Dr. Ruth Heydrich, because it's from her that I learned the answers on this slide. Do I need a blood test of my estrogen level? Nope. Well, you can if you want to, but most of the time it's going to fall within the bell-shaped curve of normal. Now, the bell-shaped curve is a statistical measurement, and most of the population falls within the bell-shaped curve. Not necessarily where we should be, but where we are, because we are over-estrogenized. And in some labs, the estrogen content that can be normal can go from 150 up to 450 and still be normal. It's estrogen at the cellular level, and we can't really measure all the estrogen very well. So when we draw blood, we're drawing out a liquid, right? Well, most estrogen is protein-bound, so it's not even in the liquid part of the blood, or if it is, it's protein-bound, and that protein is preventing us from measuring it. But estrogen is also lipophilic. Lipo means fat-loving, lipophilic, and that estrogen is stuck to the cell wall because the cell wall has fats in it. And so you're not even drawing it out, and you're not measuring what the problem is, which is the estrogen at the cellular level. That's where it does the damage. So, cancer is on the rise. It's among the leading causes of death in females in the United States as of 2015. At a lecture I attended last year, the Kaiser Foundation, Kaiser Permanente in California, that you have Kaiser out here in Hawaii, I know. Kaiser found out that in 8 Western states, cancer is the leading cause among their beneficiaries. And it's already become the #1 cause of death for some racial groups. The less animal protein in the diet, the less you're going to have excess estrogen and the less breast cancer. In the Adventist Health Study 2, there were lower rates of breast cancer among vegan women, according to Dr. Tantamano Bartley. The Adventist Health Study 2 is kind of unique. You know, I go to a lot of these conferences and I listen to experts, and they've all got one thing in common. It's just amazing. They're all talking about Adventists. Why? Because Adventists make a great group to study. Many Adventists do not have nicotine as part of their lifestyle. Many Adventists do not drink alcohol. Many Adventists do not use caffeine. And so you can really isolate the effects of diet. Now, only 8% of Adventists are vegan, and we're working to get that a little higher. And even less percentage of that are oil-free vegans. But these people are mentioning the Adventist Health Study because basically what the Adventist Health Study shows is that the closer you get to a vegan diet with no meat, dairy, or eggs, the better the health. But it's not the only study showing that. This is the Four Corners breast study, also showing that the more animal protein, the more breast cancer. And this is a study by Asian doctors in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition showing that when you have fish in your diet, it raises estrogen and cancer risk. This is dietary patterns and breast cancer risk in Asian American women. All right, it is time for a stretch break. Would you be willing to stand up with me and raise your arms above your head And we're going to sing, "The trees are gently swaying, swaying." All right, very good. Thank you. Take some deep breaths, and we're going to go on. And you may sit down. Thank you so much. I had to put that in before the slide because I know this slide is really busy. This is about omega-3, estrogen, cancer, and diabetes type 2. Dr. Hooper, in the British Journal of Medicine back in 2006, had 89 cohort studies, over 600,000 subjects. This was quite a meta-analysis. And it was found that omega-3s do not make you live longer. And they couldn't rule out harm. And you can translate that harm, cancer, from the supplements. And then Dr. Kausick in 2009 studied long-chain omega fatty acid supplements and fish and diabetes type 2. And there were over 9,000 cases. And there was a 22% higher risk of diabetes in the fish eaters. Supplements, stroke, and cancer. There's an $11 billion supplement industry, and they want you to believe that if you take their supplements, you can eat what you want, and you're going to be okay. Just like back in the running craze, Jim Fixx said, "Hey, I can eat whatever I want because I run," but not so because he dropped dead of a heart attack even though he was slender, fit, and he was an active runner. 67 trials were analyzed in a meta-analysis by Cochrane Reports, and we physicians really respect Cochrane Reports, and this came out in 2008. How can good vitamins do bad things like cause cancer? But taking supplement form of beta-carotene, vitamin A, and vitamin E significantly increase mortality. Okay, so plain English, vitamin A pills and vitamin E pills cause more deaths than they save. There's a 74% increased risk of hemorrhagic stroke from taking vitamin E. Do not take vitamin E supplements. And there's an 18% increased risk of liver cancer taking vitamin A and vitamin E. And this study, in 1994, from the National Cancer Institute, they studied more than 29,000 male smokers for 5 to 8 years, and they found that in the food form, beta-carotene, which is the precursor of vitamin A, it reduced the risk of cancer by 19%. But in pill form, vitamin A increased the risk of lung cancer by 18%. What is the deadliest cancer in the United States? The cancer that more people die from every year? It's lung cancer. All-cause mortality, what that means is dying from any cause, was increased by taking vitamin A pills by 8%. And then Dr. Rose did this study. High-fiber diet reduces serum estrogen concentrations, and it is the fiber that really helps people to reduce their estrogen and their cancer risk. And there's many studies, Dr. Dong, and so fiber is your friend, and caffeine is not. Caffeine is found in coffee, tea, soda, and chocolate. Although chocolate has more theobromine, it still has some caffeine, and both of them are bad actors. And we're going to find out how they harm us. Caffeine consumption and the risk of breast cancer in a large prospective cohort of women. This is Dr. Ken Ishitani's study, and it's important because prospective data is very important when we're looking at studies, and it related caffeine consumption to breast cancer. What Dr. Ishitani was studying was BBD, and that's benign breast disease, and its association with breast cancer risk. So caffeine consumption and coffee consumption and breast cancer risk were highest. The highest quintiles of caffeine, the more breast cancer, and the more large breast cancer, even in receptor negative. Now let's talk about adenosine. What is adenosine? Adenosine is a potent vasodilator. And vasodilation, that means arteries wide open, good blood flow, that's a good thing. But if you antagonize the adenosine receptor, that's the mechanism by which caffeine acts to cause cancerous tumors in human breast tissue, according to Dr. Wolfram in this study in 1990. And caffeine blocks the potent vasodilator, adenosine, and it increases your risk of heart attack, according to the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2006. So, how does that happen? Well, there's an enzyme system in the liver called cytochrome P450. You've probably heard of it. And there's an atypical form of it, and Caffeine is metabolized by cytochrome P450. And some people are rapid caffeine metabolizers, and some people are slow metabolizers. And an intake of coffee was associated with an increased risk of heart attack. Now, how many of you read just last week that you can drink up to 25 cups of coffee a day and not have an increased risk of heart attack? Did you read that? Yep. Why do we find so much good news about bad habits every week in the media? Well, media likes to publish what sells, and so sensationalist things sell, and everybody likes good news about bad habits, right? However, this intake of coffee was associated with an increased risk of myocardial infarction, that's a heart attack, only among slow caffeine metabolizers. Yay! So how do you and I find out if we're slow or fast metabolizers? Well, you're not going to unless you're able to go to the National Institutes of Health. And guess what percentage of us are slow metabolizers? 90% of us. So don't play Russian roulette with caffeine. In summary, consistent with most case control studies, quote, we found that an increased coffee intake is associated with an increased risk of myocardial infarction. And yay, it was non-fatal, but hey, nobody really wants a heart attack, right? Okay, so caffeine causes excess estrogen because caffeine shares the same cytochrome P450. So if you can't break down your caffeine, what happens is you get toxic with caffeine, and the liver's not going to let that happen because it knows that an overdose of caffeine can kill dogs who get into the chocolate box, you know, and it can kill young people and elderly. And so if the liver is distracted by caffeine, it cannot remove estrogen. And this was done with a study by Dr. Karen Schleip at the National Institutes of Health in women who consumed about 90 milligrams, that's about 1 cup of coffee. Okay, so adenosine, caffeine, estrogen share the same cytochrome P450 system. 1 cup per day of caffeinated soda or green tea was associated with a higher estrogen level across the races. And they studied women from age 18 to 44 over 2 years. And she did this while she was doing a research fellowship there. Caffeine and estrogen compete for the same cytochrome P450, and with estrogen really high in the monthly cycle just before the menses, if you get caffeine into your system, or chocolate, which many women crave chocolate right before their period, then the liver is so distracted removing the caffeine, it can't extract estrogen fast enough before the menses, and that worsens PMS, cramping, acne, fibrocystic disease, emotional disturbances. Any of you who want to lift up your cameras and take pictures of these slides, I should have mentioned that at the beginning, feel free to do so. If you want to live stream this on Facebook, I hope you're doing that. Okay, so they studied women who attended a GYN clinic, and 69% of them suffered breast pain each month. Cyclical mastalgia. So cyclical means it cycles around every month, and mastalgia, mast means breast, and algia means pain. And they were suffering swelling, lumpiness, heaviness, tenderness, and pain. However, they did another study, and they showed that if you reduce dietary fat to less than 15% of calories and increase the complex carbohydrates, after 6 months, these women reported less breast pain and swelling, according to this study by Dr. Boyd in The Lancet in 1988. Fiber prevents PMDD symptoms, and the more whole foods that you have in your diet, the more fruit, veggies, whole grains, and beans, the less PMS. So this study by Dr. Baga wanted to isolate, okay, was it the fiber or was it the reduced fat that reduced the pain? Fiber, we know, sweeps out excess estrogen and prevents it from recirculating into the bloodstream. And this study was noting that the drop in estrogen was not attributable to the increased fiber intake, as important as that is, but rather to reduce fat consumption. And coming up in this presentation, I'm going to show you all the things that are wrong with oil, but remember, this is one of the things wrong with eating dietary oil. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the 8 factors that increase estrogen too much. And we're going to start with dairy. Dairy provides us with too much estrogen because there's more than 7 building blocks of estrogen in cow's milk. The cow goes from 17 units when she's not pregnant to up over 1,000 units when she is pregnant. And then they're injecting her with hormones a lot of the times, which makes it even higher. And the largest source of estrogens is dietary, according to this study published in the Iran Journal of Public Health. In the Western diet, 60 to 70% of animal-derived estrogens come from dairy products. Milk contains a lot of estrogen, and that's a growth promoter that's perfect for growing a 60-pound calf into a 600-pound yearling cow in just 1 year. But cow's milk contains estrogen and proteins that, although they're good for the baby cow, they're not good for human health. And you may say, but don't I need dairy for the calcium? Don't I need dairy for strong bones? No, it's not true that you need dairy for strong bones. And the dairy industry knows this, but they're hiding this fact. And they're pulling the wool over your eyes saying, you need yogurt, you need cheese, you need low-fat dairy. What the problem is in osteoporosis is we're urinating out our calcium. And 5 factors do this: tobacco, alcohol, caffeine, salt, and animal protein. So what is it about animal protein that makes us urinate away our calcium? All proteins are made of amino acids, whether it's a plant protein or an animal protein. But the animal proteins more commonly have the amino acids that contain sulfur, and that makes sulfuric acid, which is a low pH. Now, the kidney's job is to excrete acids. That's what the kidney is doing, is taking out acids. And as it takes out the acid, it has to flush them out with water. And if we lose our calcium out because the calcium is going to buffer the acid, that calcium is being leached out of our teeth, weakening them as we age, leading to big dental bills in your 50s, and weakening our bones so that we could get osteoporosis and broken hips. So what do we need in order to prevent osteoporosis? We need weight-bearing exercise. And I hope that every one of you will be inspired by the shining example of Dr. Ruth Heydrich, who is doing that weight-bearing exercise. She's walking, she's running. And vitamin D, the sunshine vitamin. And you're fortunate here in Hawaii. There are people who live in places where they don't get enough sun. And 75% of the U.S. population is deficient in vitamin D. So this slide is very busy, so I'm going to spend a little time on it, but there are 8 factors that promote excess estrogen. We talked about the first one, dairy. But eating too much fat raises our estrogen. Every fat cell in our body is a factory for estrogen, and the more oil you eat, the more you're going to overproduce estrogen. And that fat, the fat cells can make a lot of inflammation too, besides estrogen. Now, wearing too much fat on our body is also a problem because every fat cell in our body can make estrogen and make inflammation. So how much fat should a woman's percentage of her body weight be? Anybody know? Woman should be 25% or below of her body's weight as body fat. How about for a man? Man should be below 20%. So how can you measure this? Well, you can go to Target or order it online. There's body fat percentage scales. And you program it with your age, height, and gender. And you put water on the bottoms of your bare feet, and you step on those plates, and it's going to detect a current, electrical current. And that electrical current is going through different body tissues at different rates. Bone conducts electricity different than muscle, different than body fat, different than body water, and that's how you can easily find out your body fat percentage. Now, eating cholesterol. And now you know why, because the cholesterol molecule, you saw how similar it was to estrogen, they get changed into each other. And so eating cholesterol, which is only found in meat, dairy, and eggs, can raise our estrogen levels. And we have no need to eat cholesterol in our diet. Our body makes all the cholesterol that we need. Animal feed contains hormones and antibiotics. More than 70% of all the antibiotics produced in our country every year go into the feed of healthy animals, many of them labeled organic, because it's not illegal for the rancher to say, oh, poor cow, she looks sick, I better give her some antibiotics. And so he can do that even if she's labeled an organic cow. And then drinking caffeine raises estrogen, and drinking alcohol raises estrogen. So now that you know the story about the liver taking out the estrogen, now you can understand how drinking alcohol could raise excess estrogen levels. And if every young man who took a sip of beer realized that he's raising his estrogen and suppressing his testosterone, he would think twice before he drank that beer. It's because the liver has to metabolize alcohol, because if it doesn't, if it lets that one go by, the alcohol could get so toxic that the person goes unconscious, and the body doesn't want that to happen. So the body is going to focus on getting rid of the alcohol and let the estrogen slip by and do its damage. Okay, so the factors that create too much estrogen, we're going to go into a little more depth on each one. Eating too much fat raises our estrogen. If you would like to know whether there are studies, or did I just pull that out of a hat? No, there are definite studies that show that. And then how much fat is too much fat? When fat represents more than 20% of our calories, we may create excessive estrogen, which promotes cancer. So what foods have more than 20% of their calories as fat? Well, tofu has 54% of its calories from fat, and the nuts and seeds are, around 70 to 80%, depending on the nuts and seeds. Avocado has about 75% of its calories from fat, and coconut is very high in fat. Coconut has more saturated fat than lard, and saturated fat is inflammatory and has been implicated in cancer. Wearing too much fat raises our estrogen level, according to this study. In case you wanted to know, is there scientific underpinning for the things that I say? You bet there is. And you can see that eating too much cholesterol can make you take in cholesterol and get it turned into estrogen, which suppresses your testosterone. So we're going to talk a little bit more about excess estrogen and caffeine. This is the Rancho Bernardo study from 1996. Caffeine intake has been associated with the risk of osteoporosis, breast cancer, endometriosis, fibrocystic breast disease, and has been hypothesized to exert its effects through alteration of endogenous hormone levels. Endo means inside, so the hormones we make ourselves. Hormone, estrogen, that's what it's talking about. And the Biocycle study, Dr. Karen Schleip, caffeinated beverage intake and reproductive hormones. And you know that estrogen is a reproductive hormone. This came out in 2012. So let's talk a little bit about why I felt so fortunate to be called by Rip Esselstyn to be the first medical director for his Engine 2 immersion. For the employees, they call them team members of Whole Foods Market. What we did is we took about 100 people from Whole Foods Market per group, and we did this 7 times over 3 years, and we brought them to a beautiful resort just north of Austin, Texas. But one time we were able to bring them to the big island of Hawaii and do our immersion there. And Rip Esselstyn, do you remember the movie Forks Over Knives? He's the firefighter going up the fire pole using just his arms, not his legs, and he's in great shape. And he's the son of Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn Jr., MD, who we see the taller one in this picture. And and that's Dr. T. Colin Campbell, who wrote the book Whole and the China Study, fascinating researchers, and they're in this wonderful movie, and Dr. Ruth Heydrich is also in this wonderful movie, an award-winning picture that promotes food as medicine. Is there anyone here who has seen Forks Over Knives? Could you raise your hand? Wow. There's people here who haven't seen Forks Over Knives. If you have Netflix, it's on Netflix. If you don't have Netflix, you can rent it very affordably on the internet. Please see Forks Over Knives. This movie can save your life. And so at the Engine 2 immersion, we fed them a diet without meat, dairy, eggs, oil, alcohol, caffeine for 1 week. And my staff measured the blood pressures and the weights, and we drew blood at the beginning and at the end of the immersion week. And we got some fantastic results. My job as medical director was to take them off of their blood pressure medicine before their blood pressure got so low. And for the type 2 diabetics, to cut their insulin doses, cut them, and finally, by the end of the week, get some of them completely off their insulin. And for the type 1 diabetics, who will always need their insulin, I was cutting insulin doses 20% per day. And they ate all that they wanted. It was buffet style. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, they could go back for seconds and thirds. They loved the food. And they dropped about 1 pound a day, eating all that they wanted. So that's why we taught them, eat more, weigh less. And we weren't exercising them for 8 hours a day, like on that show, The Biggest Loser. We were lecturing them. 40 hours that week of lecture, plus food demos in the evening. And they loved the food, and their moods improved, and their asthma was less, and their joint pain went away, and their skin cleared up, and they felt better. And this is Shirley, one of my patients, who has been pleased to find her way to a plant-based diet. And you can help your friends, your neighbors, your loved ones, because I know that you're here because you care about health and you care about people. So let's talk about calorie concentration. Some foods at the top of the list are very low in calorie concentration. They don't actually have enough calories to give you all the calories that you need. So you can't just eat salads. And many people simply think that that's all vegans eat is salads. But no, green vegetables are very important for you, but there's only about 100 calories per pound of spinach or per pound of lettuce. And then way down at the bottom, there's oils. 4,000 calories per pound of oil. Very concentrated in calories. And you can see that I drew a line halfway through. And if you eat above that line, the veggies, the fruit, the whole grains, and the legumes, who knows what legumes are? Beans, lentils, that's it. And if you eat above that line, it's very, very difficult for you to be overweight. It's much easier for you to achieve your ideal body weight. But notice that many of the things on this are plant-based. If you turn that brown rice, which has about 550 calories per pound of brown rice, into brown rice flour, now you have 1,450 calories per pound of brown rice flour. So foods made from flour are very dense or concentrated in calories. It's just going to be harder to lose weight on them. And the meat analogs, very high in fat. And the nuts and seeds, the coconut and the olives, very high in fat. And the oils, of course, have no fiber, so they're inflammatory. And they're the most calorie-dense food, calorie-concentrated food that you can have. But back to how you can help people. If you are willing to bring food with you wherever you go, you too can eat a diet without meat, dairy, eggs, and oil. Look at how handsome this fellow is. He's handsome before, he's handsome after, but he sure feels a lot better, and his moods are better. Thank you, Sam, for letting me use your pictures. So look at all these stomachs. We've got some that are not full at all, yet the same amount of calories as the whole full stomach. One with no, hardly any volume, she's still famished. She's going to go in search of more volume to fill her up, to stretch out her stretch receptors, to get satiety or satisfaction. And you can see here she's got 400 calories, and there are more than 4,000 calories per pound, and this person is hungry because she's not filled up. And here's peanut butter, a vegan food, but it's too concentrated in calories. It's too small of a package. It doesn't fill her up. She's still hungry. Here's grilled chicken, and maybe you're too smart to eat chicken, but you're eating fake chicken or something equally calorie concentrated, and you're still not satisfied because it didn't take up enough room in your stomach. And this person is very satisfied. She can't hold another bite, and she's going to lose the most weight despite eating a whole plate full. So there you have it. That's what I call the Starch Smart system. Eat more and weigh less. And here it is in graphical form. I know you can't read it, but all those foods are plant-based foods right there. And so what Nina and Randa Nelson, remember the Clear Skin Diet that they wrote? They had been realizing the importance of cutting out the oils, even though oils are vegan, and cutting out the high-fat foods and going for the more low-fat foods. And here's another way of picturing that. And so look at this beautiful lady. She makes her living impersonating Liza Minnelli. And she's happy here, but she's got a lot more joy and a better quality of life here. Thank you, Barbara, for letting me use your photograph to inspire audiences to thrive with plant-based diets. So you've heard me talk about oil, and not everybody who advocates a vegan diet talks about oil. And you might think, where's the research on that? So if you want one source for a lot of studies, go to the Pritikin website. But oil has no fiber. And if you haven't learned anything in this lecture, you've learned that fiber is really important for you. Oil is too dense in calories. It's the most calorie-concentrated food. There's just fat in oil. There's no protein and there's no carbohydrate. It's so easily stored as adipose. Dr. John McDougall, who taught Ruth Heydrich how to reverse her metastatic breast cancer by changing what she eats, Dr. John McDougall says, the fat that we eat is the fat that we wear, and I believe him. Oil promotes acid reflux. Sean and I used to suffer from acid reflux, but when we got the oil out of our diet, no more acid reflux. Oil hurts the endothelial cell. So what's the endothelial cell? Here's a normal human artery, and it's lined with a velvety lining called endothelium. Enzo means inside, and it makes a gas called nitric oxide. And nitric oxide dilates the artery wide open. And when you've got good blood flow, your knee meniscus isn't wearing out, and your back discs aren't slipping, and you don't have that neck pain, and you don't have the anxiety and depression. But when you eat or drink something that hurts the endothelial cell, within 20 minutes, it can't make nitric oxide. And so the artery shrinks down narrow. And what that does is it increases inflammation and cancer risk. And then you've got, the aching feet and the diabetes and the insomnia and the hearing loss and the cataracts forming. Oil promotes cancer by raising estrogens. It promotes arthritis and inflammation, and it's atherogenic. Oil raises cholesterol levels. Now, wait a minute. Have you heard those studies that say, hey, olive oil lowers cholesterol, won't raise it? Well, if you were to design a study to market your product, and in the experimental group, the group that was going to get the oil, you had the younger, non-smokers who ate more fruits and veggies, who exercised more, had a higher education level, higher socioeconomic level. And in the other group that didn't get the olive oil, you put the older, heavier, smoking, less fruits and veggies, lower socioeconomic status. Which group do you think would have a better outcome? You see, most of the research done today is not paid for by universities or government like it used to be in the olden days. Most of the research today is paid for by vendors who are selling a pill, a procedure, or a product, such as food. And they have studies that can say just about anything by not blinding the researchers as to who goes into which group. They're not randomized, even though they say they are. So it's true that if you replace meat with olive oil, you're going to do better temporarily, but that's like saying, which will kill you faster, cigars or pipes? Okay, and oil is addicting. It hits our pleasure center, and the more calorie concentrated a food, the more release of dopamine and serotonin we get from our pleasure center. So, what about eating nuts? Ellen White in the Ministry of Healing says that our people are using too many nuts. I'm going to read you the whole quote from the Ministry of Healing. Nuts and nut foods are largely coming into use to take the place of flesh meats. With nuts may be combined grains, fruits, and some roots to make foods that are healthful and nourishing. Care should be taken, however, not to use too large of a proportion of nuts. Anybody here fighting their weight? We may be eating too many nuts, seeds, avocado, and coconut. Here again, she says, are nuts really so healthy? Careful attention should be given to the proper use of nut foods. Some kinds of nuts, hello, peanuts, are not so wholesome as others, hello, almonds and walnuts. Do not reduce the bill of fare to a few articles composed largely of nut foods. These foods should not be used too freely. And here, she's so delicate, she's so tactful. If they were used more sparingly by some, the results would be more satisfactory. And here she says, as combined in large proportions with other articles in some of the recipes given, the nuts, make the food so rich that the system cannot properly assimilate it. Will eating nuts raise your cholesterol? You bet they will. Do the studies show that they don't? Oh, yes, they do. And now you know how to look at those studies for who funded them. And were the researchers blinded to who went into which group? So don't you believe it when it says that that eating nuts will lower your cholesterol? Sure, if you eat nuts instead of lard, yeah, you're going to be better. But it's more of a relative comparison. Okay. Now, what about oil? I've had people argue with me, people from my tribe, people from my family, my ohana, argue with me. Well, Ellen White says we should use olive oil, and yes, she does say that we should use it as a poultice with charcoal. But here's one of her things that she says about olives and olive oil. Ministry of Healing, page 298. When properly prepared, olives, like nuts, supply the place of butter and flesh meats. The oil, as eaten in the olive, is far preferable to animal oil or fat. It serves as a laxative. Its use will be found beneficial to consumptives. What's a consumptive? Tuberculosis sufferer. Its use will be found beneficial to consumptives, and it is healing to an inflamed, irritated stomach. But some of us are eating too much fat. So I'm going to leave the subject of oil because, people get so mad at me about that. But I have found in my own experience that when I was a vegan, I still had some asthma until 1 month after I gave up the olive oil, and then no more asthma. And if I would like to wheeze again, haha, all I have to do is add oil back into my diet. So, the talk is food, mood, and health. We haven't talked much about mood, and now we're going to talk about the hope that there is for anxiety and depression. And I am indebted to Dr. Neil Nedley, whose name I'm sure is familiar to many of you. And he's got 10 risk categories for depression. And many of them we can't do anything about. We can't do anything about the genetics we inherited or the way that we were raised, and that's the first two, genetic and developmental. Some of us have to work night shifts because that's the job we're able to get, and that's a very difficult thing for depression. But the good news is there's 10 hit categories, and if you have 4 or more, you're at much higher risk for depression. But if you have less than 4, it's not a guarantee that you'll suffer anxiety, which is twice as common as depression. So let's talk about the other ones. Exercise. Exercise is probably the best antidepressant ever. And if you exercise in fresh air and sunlight, so much the better. Try to get at least 30 minutes a day, every day. And nutrition. We need a low-fat, oil-free, plant-based diet high in folate, which comes from foliage. It's a B vitamin. But do the supplements work? We're going to show you the studies that show they don't. The higher the intake of fat, sugar, and cholesterol, the greater the risk of depression, according to the studies I'll show you. And then there are the toxics reasons for depression. Lead, mercury, arsenic, bismuth, other toxins are coming in through fish and seafood especially because all the oceans are polluted. And then there's the addictions. When we're addicted to caffeine, tobacco, drugs like pot, alcohol, we've got a much higher risk of depression and anxiety. And then there's medical reasons. It's depressing to have diseases like type 2 diabetes, terminal cancer, head injuries, hepatitis C, strokes. And then, of course, absence of social support. Some of us go through periods of depression when we've lost a spouse through death or divorce. You notice that I mentioned 10 hit categories, and I see only 9 there. What's number 10? Number 10 is the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is our chooser, the seat of the will, morality, and judgment. And if we do things to the frontal lobe, like focusing on the negative thoughts, hopelessness, helplessness, jumping to conclusions, overwhelming yourself with your expectations, negatively self-labeling, undervaluing your rewards, being too perfectionistic, fear of failing, fear of success, fear of disapproval or criticism, coercion, feeling resentful about everything, low frustration tolerance, all of these things can make us much more likely to be depressed or anxious. But Dr. Nedley talks about cognitive behavioral therapy, which has a 98% success rate after 1 year of people who have reversed their anxiety and depression with low-fat, plant-based diets, exercise, listening to classical music 30 minutes a day, trusting in God's love, and using cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy tells us that thoughts and beliefs create feelings, and out of feelings flows behavior. And if we change our thoughts and beliefs, we can get better feelings and have the best behavior. So let's go into the biochemical basis of depression. The monoamines are related to depression because the monoamines are depleted in depression. Monoamines are our feel-good hormones, serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. So there's an oxidase, an enzyme, that breaks down excess monoamines. And if we're deficient already in monoamines, oh no, now here comes this enzyme breaking it down even more. How are we going to get enough feel-good neurotransmitters? Well, a plant-based diet can safely tamp down the activity of your monoamine oxidase. Many plant foods contain phytonutrients. Phyto means plant, so the good things in the plants can naturally inhibit the MAO, apples, berries, onions, grapes, oregano, according to a study published in 2014. Serotonin, it's our feel-good monoamine. Many of the drugs that are for depression are aimed at boosting your level of serotonin, and it comes from the pleasure center where it's stored. And how do we make more of it? Well, its precursor is called tryptophan, an amino acid precursor of serotonin. But the problem is that most foods contain a smaller amount of tryptophan compared to the amounts of other amino acids. And all the amino acids are competing to get into the brain through the blood-brain barrier. It's like a gate. How can little tryptophan, who is outnumbered, win the race against the other amino acids? Well, let's put it to the test, as Dr. Michael Greger says on his website, nutritionfacts.org. High protein meals cause tryptophan levels in the brain to go down. High carbohydrate meals cause tryptophan levels in the brain to go up. Plant-based diets are rich in carbohydrates. Animal diets are rich in protein. High carbohydrate meals cause serotonin levels in the brain to go up. The more tryptophan in the brain, the more serotonin in the brain, according to Dr. Wortman at MIT. So how are you going to get your share of serotonin? Eating meals rich in carbohydrate boosts levels of insulin. So when the blood sugar goes up, insulin level goes up. Insulin's key opens the door to the muscle. Muscle has a door with a lock in it. Insulin's got the key. The amino acids get sucked up by the muscles for fuel. So the amino acids are called away from the brain where they're trying to get through the gates, the blood-brain barrier. And all those other amino acids, because they're plentiful, they get more sucked up by the muscles. With the other amino acids used up by the muscles, little tryptophan, waiting patiently in line at the brain, becomes first to cross the blood-brain barrier. And that's how carbohydrate-rich meals boost levels of tryptophan and thus increase levels of serotonin in the brain. So to make it easy for you to remember, animal protein meal, less happy. Animal protein meals are not happy meals. Plant protein meal, more happy. Carbohydrates boost serotonin levels. It's really true. Greens blunt the blues. And how do they do that? With folate, which comes from foliage. However, according to this journal review in Nutritional Neuroscience, it's remarkable how much they do this. By 62%, a higher consumption of vegetables can cut the odds of developing depression by 62%. Eating lots of fruits and veggies may present a non-invasive, natural, and inexpensive therapeutic means to support a healthy brain, unquote. That's what the researchers said. I'm sorry this slide is so busy, but basically we've got a lot of science that says the more veggies, the less depression. And the intakes of fruit and vegetables are associated in their, with the folate levels in their natural state, because folic acid comes from pharmaceutical labs. Folic acid is in pill form, but folate comes from foliage. Do supplements work? No, they don't. The pills and powders of the supplement industry have not been shown to decrease depression, according to this study. And folic acid increases the risk of breast cancer 153%. And what kind of pills commonly taken by, half the population when they're pregnant, hint, hint, prenatal vitamins are stoked with folic acid, but it increases the risk of breast cancer 153%. And folic acid in pill form increases the risk of prostate cancer 153%, because did you know that prostate cancer and breast cancer are very, very similar? Two different genders, basically the same cancer. And this study on aging Latinos in the Sacramento area showed that the pills didn't do it for them. Do foods affect mood? This study studied vegetarian diets which were associated with healthy mood states in a cross-sectional study of Seventh-day Adventist adults. And the vegetarians reported significantly less negative emotion than the omnivores, according to Dr. Bezold. How is that? Well, it's through arachidonic acid. What's arachidonic acid? It's an omega-6 fatty acid, so that's an essential fatty acid. We don't make it, we got to get it through our diet. However, there's a lot of omega-6 in the diet, and the biggest sources are chicken, eggs, meat, and fish. In fact, chicken and eggs contribute more than all other sources combined. And eating just one egg can significantly raise your arachidonic acid levels. Why does that matter? Because it causes brain inflammation, anxiety, depression, insomnia. Omnivores who eat everything consume 9 times more arachidonic acid than those eating plant-based diets. An interventional study, now that's the gold standard in nutritional research. An interventional study is like this. You gather the subjects, you change their diet, and you see what happens. So they took men and women who already ate meat at least once per day, and they took away their chicken and their fish and their eggs and their other meat, and within 2 weeks, they had improved moods, according to this study published in 2012. Now, this is the famous GEICO study. I love this study. Dr. Neil Barnard, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. So he got a contract with the insurance seller GEICO. You know, you've seen the GEICO ads with the gecko. And so they had 10 GEICO workplace locations across the country. And they took the overweight diabetic employees and they encouraged them to follow a whole food plant-based diet. That's what WFPB means, whole food plant-based. And there wasn't any portion control, no carb tracking, no calorie counting. They were specifically told, don't change your exercise habits. We want to study what diet does for moods and for diabetes. And they didn't give them the food, but the GEICO cafeteria did start, offering some plant-based entrees like bean burritos and veggie minestrone soup. And a control group of employees did not receive any dietary advice, and they studied them for 5 months. This was published in 2013. And a plant-based diet was best to prevent depression. It was a resounding success, not just for body weight and blood sugar levels, but also cholesterol levels went down, better emotional states, less depression, less anxiety, less fatigue. They had a better sense of well-being and a better daily functioning. Dr. Neil Barnard wrote this wonderful cookbook, Power Foods for the Brain, and if some of you are worried about memory loss and preventing Alzheimer's, this is your book. The whole food plant-based diet can be the best medicine for the brain because the studies clearly show that the more eggs, the more cheese, the more oil, the more memory loss, and the sooner the memory loss. Is overeating a risk factor for depression? The studies say that it is. And there's results from my private practice. I've seen people who cut out the meat, dairy, eggs, oil, alcohol, caffeine, and I've done DEXAs on them from 1 year to the next, same facility, and I've seen bone densities go up in them. And no, it wasn't the development of arthritis. It was actual increase in their bone density. Some people moving from the osteoporosis category to the osteopenia category. Other people moving from the osteopenia, or lack of, not all the way to osteoporosis, osteopenia category, back to normal, without medication. And then, of course, my own asthma, but the joy of seeing my asthmatic patients reverse their asthma, and the joy of getting diabetes reversed for my patients, and lupus, and multiple sclerosis, and PMDD, and fertility. There are some people who have been 15 years waiting for a baby and unable to achieve pregnancy. And when they go on a diet without meat, dairy, eggs, oil, alcohol, caffeine, they're able to get pregnant, and it changes their life, and they're so happy. I've seen people who have HPV, human papillomavirus, resolve their HPV status so quickly it astounds me, normalize their pap smears so much without cryosurgery to their cervix or LEEP procedures. And I never realized when I went through medical school that thyroid nodules could disappear. I'm not guaranteeing you that every thyroid nodule will disappear in a plant-based diet, but I've seen it in some of my patients, and I never read this in a textbook. And what I get the most satisfaction out is seeing people who were once practically disabled from anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder or depression, to see them regain their life, re-enter the workforce, and live lives that are thriving and fulfilled on plant-based diets. And they're so, so happy. And so eat plants, because that's the heart of the matter when it comes to fitness and health. How fit can you be when you're too sick to exercise? One last thing about diabetes and dietary fat. Intramyocellular lipid. Okay, now I know that's a big word. Intra means inside. Myo is the muscle cell. Remember, muscle has a door, and when you're having fat, it's as if fat is gummed in the lock of muscle's door, and insulin's key won't fit. And insulin has his girlfriend Sugar by the hand, and Sugar cannot get in. She doesn't have a key. She can't unlock the door to muscle. And so muscle doesn't get the glucose or energy it needs for strength and warmth. And so glucose stays in the artery wall, turning the artery wall thick and sticky like cotton candy or honey. And then the pancreas is tasting the blood flowing by and says, oh my goodness, the blood sugar level is too high. Well, my job is the pancreas. I'm supposed to make more insulin. So it makes more and more insulin, and it burns itself out. And when the pancreas can no longer keep up with the demand, blood sugar levels rise, and you need lots of diabetes medicine. How much better to get out the meat, dairy, eggs, oil, refined foods that are too concentrated in calories like oil, and narcotic foods like caffeine. And we're going to, duplicate. And we're going to talk a little bit about the social support, because I know that you have a thriving vegan community here on the island, and you're trying to inspire your neighbors. And so our pod, which was formed after the movie Plant Pure Nation came out, you can go to plantpurenation.com and you can see this online for free. This is the sequel to Forks Over Knives. And Nelson Campbell, the son of T. Colin Campbell, he stands up at the end of the movie and he inspires people to start potluck clubs in their cities. And our pod is called ATX Alive. And if you go to atxalive.com, you can see that we get about 50 to 80 people. And most of these people are not members of my church, but my church donates the fellowship hall. And they're coming every month for oil-free vegan potlucks and scientific lectures, and you can see pictures of them here. And I would like to be able to help as many people as possible. You can pay for a phone consult, but you don't have to, because it's all free on my website, drcarney.com. And I'm hoping that you will avail yourself of the free stuff there so that you can see, we have over 1,000 studies abstracted and archived there. I haven't done the research. I'm just finding the research and putting it out there so that you can type in the search field what subject you're interested in and see the studies that support a whole food plant-based diet. As we close, we're going to talk a little bit about coffee, tea, soda, and chocolate. Only bacteria can make vitamin B12. Plants can't make it. Animals can't make it. But because animal products are swarming with bacteria, you're likely to take in some bacteria with the animal products and get some B12. Caffeine is a diuretic. That means it makes you urinate away your water-soluble vitamins like B12. But I have a lot more deficiency in my non-vegan patients than I do in my vegan patients, because my non-vegan patients tend to be the ones who drink more caffeine and more alcohol, and they're pushing out their vitamin B12. They're also less likely to supplement than my vegan patients are with B12. So remember to take vitamin B12, because we're just not getting enough of it in our modern diets. Caffeine can impact fertility negatively and delay conception among fertile women. And this was associated in all the countries that they studied. Even men's fertility was decreased by caffeine in their diet. This was published on a website called Fertility and Sterility, and it was one of the first studies to show that what men eat or drink can affect fertility. So, drinking caffeine increases risk for pregnancy loss. Of course, the women are going to lose their pregnancies more early on, but the study goes for men and women equally. Here's a quote from the researcher, Dr. Jermaine Buck Lewis, who led the study at the National Institute for Child Health and Disease at the NIH. And she said, there's something about drinking caffeinated beverages that is associated with pregnancy loss, whether you're the mother or the father. So 344 couples in Texas and Michigan were studied as they tried to conceive, and 28% of their 344 pregnancies ended in miscarriage. That was 98 miscarriages total. But drinking 3 or 4 caffeinated beverages per day raised the risk of early pregnancy loss, that's a miscarriage, by 74%. And that held whether the women drank before conception or afterwards. But the men were, what they drank in the 2 weeks leading up to conception was also important. And so, the women were more likely to miscarry if she and her partner drank more than 2 caffeinated beverages a day during the weeks leading up to conception. And in the first 7 weeks of pregnancy, if she drank more than 2 daily caffeinated beverages, much more likely to have a miscarriage. I'm sorry this slide is very busy, but basically, if you want to see the quotes showing that caffeine leads to miscarriage, this is the life study. 501 couples from 4 counties in Michigan and Texas from 2005 to 2009. So let's talk about green tea, which many people hear, oh, it's so healthy for you, it's got so many antioxidants. Well, newsflash, a lot of plants have antioxidants, but the green tea makers or vendors are trying to get you to believe that the high amount of antioxidants negates any of the bad stuff about the caffeine in the green tea. So where does green tea come from? It comes from the top 2 leaves and the bud of the tea plant, and that's where the most methylxanthines are. This is a bitter alkaloid. And to turn green tea into black tea, you put those green tea leaves and the bud into a big vat, and you add bacteria and you ferment. And what do the bacteria do while they're fermenting? They're eating the nutrition, the good things, from the green leaves. And when there's no nutrition left, the bacteria die and the fermentation process is over, and you're left with this vile-tasting black stuff that has a very high caffeine content and very few nutrients, and that's the black tea or the Lipton's tea or the Darjeeling or the Earl Grey breakfast tea. So, why is there so much favor, so many studies that make green tea sound like it's the best thing? So, the researchers admit it themselves in this 2010 study. When they put the people into the research groups, the experimental group were more likely to be premenopausal. Okay, so is that younger or older? So that's younger. Have a higher income, higher educational attainment, and have a higher daily dietary intake of fruit, vegetables, and soy. So they're admitting it. They had the healthier ones, the younger ones, the higher education level ones, in the group that got the green tea. Well, no wonder their health looked better. Okay, let's talk about chocolate. Chocolate comes from cacao, and the cacao bean has 55% of its calories from fat right out of the starting gate. So remember what I said, when a food has more than 20% of its calories from fat, some of you are going to have health risks because of that, because some of you are going to fight your weight or excess estrogen-related stuff. And then you take that cacao, to make it into chocolate, you have to add sugar, a lot of it, because cacao is naturally bitter. And cacao is naturally gritty. So to overcome that, they add a lot of fat, and most of it is saturated, which is very inflammatory and associated with Alzheimer's, memory loss, cancer, arthritis. And then if you add milk to it and make it milk chocolate, it's even more addictive than the theobromine, the sugar, and the fat. You add the animal protein, and it's the quadruple whammy to the pleasure center, and boom, up goes the level of endorphins, and as soon as it hits the tongue, you say, more of that, whatever that was, I want more of that. And that's what makes caffeine so addicting. So, why do the plants contain caffeine and theobromine? Why are those bitter alkaloids, the methylxanthines, in the plants? They're designed as plant defenses to keep the plant from being overgrazed. And I'm indebted to Dr. Walter Veith for teaching me this on a YouTube video. The eland is the largest ungulate in Africa. So picture him out on the savannah, and he's grazing on the acacia tree leaves, which has a pleasant taste to him. And so as he bites, the tree senses that the leaves are being crushed or chewed. So it sends out a pheromone, that's a wind-borne scent chemical, to tell the leaves in the vicinity where the eland is chewing, raise your level of caffeine and theobromine in the plant. Something is chewing the leaves. We might get overgrazed, and we as a plant might die. And so then the next bite that the eland takes, bitter, astringent, because that's the effect of the bitter alkaloid. And the pheromone doesn't have a range wider than 50 meters, so if the animal wanders down about 50 meters and starts to graze again, then the animal can get sweet-tasting leaves because those leaves have not gotten the pheromone. They haven't gotten the signal to raise their level of bitter alkaloids yet. And so the eland can get what it needs to survive, and the plant can prevent overgrazing and get what it needs to survive. And that is why there is these bitter alkaloids in the plant. But it wasn't designed for our consumption. So, in summary, and thank you for your kind attention, what should our goals be? We should be 100% plant-based. We should cut out the cheese, the yogurt, the eggs, and we should get less than 20% of our calories from fat if we want the best health, the most energy, the best thinking minds. To have our foods whole and unprocessed means minimal loss of water. Don't blend up those fibers. Don't add sugar, fat, and salt, because that's what processing is. And if you're going to eat grains, and I do every day, eat only whole grains. I have such a debt of gratitude to the many wonderful researchers and athletes and scientists and doctors and regular people who have reversed their health challenges by adopting whole food plant-based diet and telling others about it. And that's why I'm grateful for the opportunity to come all this way to Hawaii and to tell you what I've learned. What we're going to do now is, I know I've kept you a long time. You're welcome to leave if you would like to. However, if you would like to come to the microphones, Kiala has very kindly set up microphones. And if you would like to ask me questions, I'm happy to ask you questions as long as you have energy to ask them. And thank you so much for your kind attention. Is there anything that you wanted to ask the doctor for free?
What do you think of sugar substitutes like stevia?
What do I think of sugar substitutes like stevia? Thank you, sister, for asking that. I'm glad that you did. You know, stevia is naturally sweet and it doesn't have any calories. But what happens, even though it does not cause a glucose spike, within 4 hours, the non-nutritive sweeteners like monk fruit and stevia, xylitol and erythritol, they cause a rise in the free fatty acids. And the scientists believe that this rise in free fatty acids 4 hours after you've taken the stevia, that's what contributes to overweight, because we have very clear science that shows that the non-nutritive sweeteners with no calories are associated with greater obesity.
So like when you eat oatmeal, you like to have something sweet with the oatmeal.
Yes, I
So
do.
what can what kind of sugar?
Okay.
I know unrefined sugar, but what kind?
Okay. I will tell you exactly what kind of sugar I put in my oatmeal. The kind of sugar, her question was, so when you eat oatmeal, what are you going to sweeten it with? The kind of sugar that I put in my oatmeal is the kind of sugar that's found naturally in a whole, unprocessed fruit. And I grew up hating beans and vegetables, and I needed sugar on every strawberry that I ate, and that was me. And my name for myself was the fat-seeking missile. And I had a terrible diet. I was vegetarian since age 9, thanks to my new stepdad at age 9. But I didn't like the fruits just as they weren't sweet enough for me. But the good news is, my sister, that your taste buds will neuroadapt. They will change. It may take 6 months. For me, I was such a goner, it took me a year. But now the fruits are sweet enough. So I chop up those apples and strawberries and blueberries, and I pack them into my oatmeal. Honestly, though, I like savory oats with onion powder, garlic powder, granulate, dillweed flake. I like that even better than sweet oats, because my friends from India taught me that you can eat breakfast grains like oats. You can eat them as savory, and they can be just as good. And you wouldn't believe it. I wouldn't have believed it. I can now eat my oatmeal plain, not cooked with salt, just cooked with water, nothing, and be really, really happy. But taste buds adapt, and so I'm grateful. And when you're hungry, it makes a big difference.
I eat oatmeal in the morning. I eat oatmeal in the morning. I eat it with sunflower seeds and walnuts, and I put a little bit of honey for taste. But is that all right?
The question is, my brother here eats oatmeal in the morning, and he eats it with nuts and seeds. And many people eat oatmeal in the morning, and I'm not going to knock what you want to eat for breakfast. So let me tell you what I eat for breakfast and why. I eat these categories of food: beans, greens, squash, and yams. And the reason that I do that is for the most energy, the most mental clarity, because I'm 59 years old, and I run a solo general practice in a small town, and I need that energy. I need to be on the top of my game. So it's not that what you're eating, brother, is bad. However, the reason that I have chosen to limit the nuts and seeds is because when I was 36 years old, I was diagnosed with prediabetes, and I don't want to be pre-diabetic anymore. And now I'm 59 years old, and I don't have prediabetes because I've cut the level of nuts and seeds down to a minimum. Oh, sure, they're healthy. I eat them, but way, way less than most people do. And the reason that I eat the beans, greens, squash, and yams for breakfast is because that's a high protein load. And the studies show that the bigger our meal at breakfast, the better, because we're more insulin sensitive at breakfast time. So I don't eat sweet things until supper time. Dinner. I'm from Illinois. Can't get the Illinois out of the girl. The evening meal is my smallest meal, and that's when I eat my oatmeal and fruit. And I eat the big meal at breakfast and the medium meal at lunch and the small meal at supper. So I eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, supper like a pauper. And I don't put the walnuts and the almonds and the cashews that I love in my oatmeal because I don't want to plug up my little doors in the muscle so that I'll be insulin resistant and become pre-diabetic again. Because the more fat that I eat, the more fat that I wear. The more fat that I eat, the more hot flashes I have. Pardon me, too much information. The more fat that I eat, the more, I fight the pot belly. And I don't want to do that.
Hello again. Is there an association between large breasts and estrogen?
That is a fascinating question, sister, and I'm glad you asked it. Her question was, is there an association between large breasts and estrogen? I believe that there is. I believe that when people are eating eggs and dairy and oil, breast tissue is stimulated to grow, to enlarge, because estrogen is a growth promoter. And so, naturally, we know that there are many women who are having breast augmentation despite eating meat, dairy, eggs, oil, all the things that over-estrogenize them. So genetically, some people are just destined to have larger breasts, and some people are just destined to have smaller ones. But it's much better to get the meat, dairy, eggs, and oil out of your life and to have less breast cancer, because who cares what you look like when you're in a casket? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Denise, and I have friends that are having fertility problems, and they are mad amounts of caffeine drinkers, and I was wondering if the Red Bull, is that caffeine, the high caffeine? Because I'm thinking now that I have to tell her, they drink a Red Bull or 2 or 3 every day, that cutting it down or getting rid of it would help with her fertility.
Red Bull is harming people's health. Sorry, too blunt. Yeah, it's the caffeine. Nobody needs Red Bull. It's bad for people.
Well, my husband is diabetic, and I'm diabetic, but he loves to eat a watermelon, a lot of water, and I like bananas. And I wouldn't want to give up pancakes, so I had read a recipe to have banana pancakes. Now, how does that affect the diabetic? How much can you have? And I try to tell my husband, don't have too much watermelon because it's just too much for his blood sugar. But am I right or am I wrong to tell him to back off on that? And what about my banana pancakes?
Eat your bananas and eat your watermelon, because it's not the bananas and the watermelon that are harming you. There are people who don't metabolize their sugars very well, and the reason is they're either eating too much fat and animal protein, or they're wearing too much body fat, because when we are wearing too much body fat, we're insulin resistant. And people have no idea how toxic to the beta cells that produce insulin the dietary fat and the body fat is. So I'm not going to take your banana pancakes away from you, but I would like you to make them not with flour, not with oil, but with oats, like oatmeal flakes.
Hi, how long do I cook my beans, or what can I do to not cause flatulence?
That's a great question. This is a question that bears repeating. How long should I cook my beans? How can I cook my beans not to cause flatulence, which is gas? And so, there's something under the bean skin called cellulose that we cannot digest, and so it can cause gas if you don't have the right kind of bacteria in your colon. So hang with me, it's going to be a little more complicated of an answer. If you soak your beans overnight, that's going to help. Pour off that water, rinse them real good, and then put them in your Instant Pot and cook them on the bean setting if you want to. And then, when they're done with their 30 minutes on the bean setting, slow cook them overnight for 10 hours, and that's going to help you a lot. So that's the short answer to your question. Or you can put a strip of kombu, that's a seaweed, in there, and they say that helps. But here's the deal. There's 2 kinds of bacteria. There's plant digesting bacteria, which like a high pH, and there's animal protein digesting bacteria, which like a low pH. So the animal proteins have a low pH. They're acidic, not alkaline like the plants. And if you eat any animal proteins in a 30-day period, what you're going to have is you're going to have a drop of acid. Let's say it's just one bite of cheese, and you have this one bite of cheese, and you say, hey, you know, I've been good all month. I'm going to indulge in a little bite of cheese. Well, that cheese has a very low pH, and like a chemistry experiment, it washes through the intestine, drops the pH low acidic, and the alkaline-loving bacteria die. They cannot survive in the low pH of the animal protein that just washed through. And so now you don't have the kind of bacteria that know how to digest plants without giving you gas. So the most misery that you can have is vegan one day, omnivore the next. That's a lot of gas right there. So there's a probiotic that's grown on non-animal sources, and it's called Endomune. You can buy this online, about $30. Endomune is a vegan probiotic, and if you take that morning and night, empty stomach, that can help you. And there's a plant-based enzyme by Swanson's Vitamins called anti-gas, and that is taken at the beginning of each meal, and that can help you through this transition. But here's the good news. After about 6 months on a plant-based diet, and you haven't eaten any animal protein at all, that gas is a thing of the past. And take it from the queen of gas, it's wonderful to not have that anymore. And so if you drink your water in between meals, you're going to have a lot less gas. Every morning, start your day with 16 ounces of water. If you want lemon in it, or if you want warm or cold, however you like it, 16 ounces. And then an hour later, your stomach is waking up and ready for a bigger breakfast. And if you're not used to a bigger breakfast, start slow, just a tablespoon of beans, a tablespoon of greens, a tablespoon of squash, a tablespoon of yams. These are categories of foods. And work it so that you make that supper really light, and after a very light supper for a few days, your body will get used to it. 16 ounces of water an hour before breakfast, 16 ounces of water an hour after breakfast, 16 ounces of water an hour after that. Okay, wow, that's 48 ounces of water before noon. Get your 64 ounces of water in before 5 p.m. Get it in between the meals, and you'll have a lot less gas. So 64 ounces before 5 p.m. And if you want to drink water after that, that's fine. But get in your 64 ounces. If you're an adult, get in your 64 ounces before 5 p.m. and drink it in between the meals, and you have a lot less gas. Now, speaking of gas, if you mix fruits and vegetables, especially certain fruits and vegetables, you're going to have a lot more gas. Why is that? Well, the stomach is stubborn. It won't let anything out until everything's ready to go. And certain vegetables have a very high protein content, so do beans, and they take a long time to digest. So they're not ready to go out yet. And if you had leafy green vegetables, you know, a lot of protein content in that. 50% of the calories in spinach are from protein. And so it takes a long time to break those down and get them ready to empty the stomach. But the fruit is sitting there, and hey, it digests quickly, it's ready to go. So the fruit is sitting there fermenting the vegetables, and you get kind of sluggish after lunch, you know, and can't stay awake, and you feel like reaching for the caffeine, and you get more gas, especially if you combine melons and leafy green vegetables. That's the gassiest combination you could do. So if you eat your fruit at the beginning of the meal, you're less likely to have gas. And if you, like me, save the fruit until the end of the day, and in the evening meal, I don't eat the vegetables. It's a small, light, early. It's a fruit and an oatmeal kind of a meal for me. Then you have a lot less gas, and things digest better, and you have more energy. You're not kind of giving yourself a little alcohol in the bloodstream, and you stay more alert.
Hello.
Hi.
While listening to your presentation, I was sort of looking like you're talking more about hormone health, our hormones health, about our hormones and our endocrine system, which may be the base of all the diseases we have. So I don't have questions, but I'm asking if we have handouts for your presentation.
My sister, I'm glad for your comments, and I agree with you that imbalance of the hormones can cause a lot of diseases. And I did not bring a handout because I flew here, and so no. Usually I travel with handouts when I don't have to fly, but it's on the website. If you go to drcarney.com, the membership is free, and then you have access to me, there at the members. You can sign up at drcarney.com, and you just type in the search field anything that you want to know, and it saves a tree, so hopefully better than a handout. However, I believe my brother, Dr. Foster, is going to hand out, maybe you already have, to people something. Oh, they gotten it. Okay, good. And I see my sister, Moniz, Andrew Moniz. It is so good to see you.
Hi, Dr. Carney.
You make me cry.
It's good to see you. We haven't seen each other in a very long time. I have two questions. One is, I read online people advocating that you should sprout your grains before eating them because of phytic acid and other things, and I'm wondering what your opinion is about sprouting grains. And also, you mentioned about fermentation in green tea to black tea. A lot of people advocate eating more fermented foods for gut health. And so I wonder what your opinion is about that.
Her questions were about sprouting grains to get rid of the phytic acid. Phytic acid is a component of plants that's a plant defense, but phytic acid in grains is no problem, and you do not have to sprout your grains to get rid of the phytic acid. You don't have to worry about that. However, if you would like the scientific underpinnings of that statement, if you go into drcarney.com, there's an article, and the title of the article is Phytic Acids in Grain, No Problem. And so you can get the underpinnings of it there. If you want to sprout your grains and you have the time, go for it. Sprouting is healthy. It's good for you. Her second question was about fermentation, green tea to black tea and all that. And many people saying, hey, fermentation is good, fermentation is good. Let me tell you why I think fermentation is not good and why I stay away from all fermented foods. It's true that bacteria do the fermenting. And it's true that the gut microbiome, which is full of beneficial bacteria, is very, very important. But one of the byproducts of fermentation is complex acids, which taste really good. And one of those complex acids is called vinegar. And so vinegar is toxic to bacteria. When the bacteria are done eating all the nutrients out of the food, and they've elaborated enough vinegar or other complex acids, then the bacteria die off because they have no food, and the vinegar is killing them. You know what a good cleaning agent vinegar is, right? And dissolving of the calcium and stuff. And so the vinegar has the same low pH as lemon juice, down in the 2s. And when you eat lemon juice, the body gets alkalinized, and the alkaline state is an anti-cancer state, but the acidic state is a cancer-promoting state. And vinegar is acidifying. And remember, those kidneys, that's their job, is to remove acids, make the kidneys work harder. More acid reflux, more dental enamel erosion. And I have chosen to keep vinegar out of my life, despite the fact that I love the taste of it, because if I'm going to need that little bite, I'm going to get it from lemon juice or other tart fruits, raspberries, that kind of thing. And I'm going to not hurt my gut bacteria by putting vinegar in them. And studies of Asian people show that there's a higher correlation of cancers of the sinus and the esophagus with the use of pickled vegetables, which are fermented. And sinuses and esophagus are part of the lining organs. So the respiratory system has a lining, the GI system gastrointestinal system has a lining, and these cancers are just much more prevalent, nasopharyngeal cancers. With the more fermented food, the more nasopharyngeal cancers of the head and neck. And so I have chosen to not use the vinegars because I don't want the osteoporosis, the cancer. I don't want anything hurting my gut microbiome.
So to clarify, you're including in those vinegars apple cider vinegar, which is widely touted by many people
Oh,
as being
yes.
very healthy.
Apple cider vinegar is touted as a health promoting thing, and I am completely against it, absolutely, because it is a fermented food. But remember that nowadays there is so much deceit in marketing. There are so many studies that give you good news, and hey, these products are addicting. Who doesn't love vinegar? Everybody loves the taste of vinegar. It's loaded in all the restaurant foods. I mean, it's just everywhere. A lot of my colleagues that I respect sell vinegar in the plant-based world. I'm not putting them down. I'm just saying I disagree with them.
What kind of herb teas are good for your health? Like, there's a lot of, we don't just want to drink water. We want to have something with flavor. So what can we drink that would be, well, I know not add sugar or anything like that to it, but something that's good for us, herbal teas.
If
Name
the
a few.
box of the herbal tea says caffeine-free, that's a good tea. Yeah, hawthorn berry for hypertension and those kind of things, but this is all marketing. I used to like caffeine-free tea a lot. I really liked it. And so I went to my dentist, and he's plant-based too. And I went to my dentist and I said, I just drink caffeine-free tea. How about that? And I thought he would pat me on the back. And he said, what color is your tea? And I looked at him and he says, what color do you want your teeth? Oh, so now I just drink water. And the reason I just drink water is because your taste buds change. And there was a time when drinking water was boring. I had to have some flavor. And now water is my drink of choice. And that just seems about as boring as manna, 3 times a day, 40 years in the wilderness. Whose idea was that? You see, we're living in a very special time, brothers and sisters, and I can say this because I'm speaking to an audience that is largely Seventh-day Adventist. We're living in a very special time, and in that special time, the Day of Atonement, the children of Israel ate special food, simple food. And, you know, they took off their jewelry and they lived simply. You know, it wasn't about them and their bling. It was about preparing their hearts for the coming of the Lord. And I have deliberately, you know, stayed out of the spiritual. I know it's Sabbath, and I would like to take the opportunity now to talk about the spiritual. It's not that drinking caffeine-free tea is bad for you spiritual. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that being simple, it's not a bad thing. And before I talk about the spiritual, I'm going to talk about Jane Esselstyn. And Jane is a wonderful person. The whole Esselstyn family is wonderful people. And one time I tried to give her a gift. This is back when I drank caffeine-free tea. I tried to give her a gift of my favorite tea. And she said, no, thank you. I won't drink it. We just drink water. Us Esselstyns, that's all we drink is just water. And so she wouldn't take my gift of tea. And that kind of shocked me. And I thought, wow. And so I started, studying into the reasons. I want my teeth white, okay? So now I have become a water drinker, preferentially. And will I drink caffeine-free tea? Sure, on a rare occasion, I will. But most of the time, I've learned to satisfy myself with water, and it's refreshing. It's very satisfying. So, hey, nothing wrong with caffeine-free tea. If you like that, go for that. But a lot of people really long to have whiter teeth.
Have you heard of the Blue Zone Project? And if you have, could you tell us something about it?
Oh, thank you for that opportunity. Yes, I have heard of the Blue Zone Project. The Blue Zones are areas where people live a long, long time, longer than the average, population on Earth. And one of the Blue Zones is Sardinia, in Italy, and one of the Blue Zones is Okinawa, Japan, and one of the Blue Zones is Loma Linda, California. And of those Blue Zones, these are the top 3, 2 of them are shrinking as the diet becomes westernized. There's only one of them that the population of centenarians, or people who reach age 100, is not shrinking, and that's Loma Linda, California. The Blue Zones is a book by Dan Bittner, published by National Geographic. It's a researcher. And what was common to all the diets of the blue zones was a plant-based diet, especially with beans. Beans are the secret of Latino longevity. The researchers have postulated that the more beans people eat, that's a good thing. And they had other things in common, such as social support and exercise and not smoking and those kind of things. So once upon a time, there was a woman who reached out and touched the hem of Jesus' garment, and boom, she was instantaneously healed of her dysfunctional uterine bleeding that had been going on for 12 years. And Jesus wanted to recognize her and give her a double blessing. He wanted to give her physical healing, yes, but also spiritual healing by recognizing her and to letting her know that she was important to him. And that's why he called her out on it. But what can we do today? Because today, Jesus isn't here that we can reach out and boom, touch the hem of his garment and be healed. Today, I believe that Jesus is healing in a different way. I believe that he's giving us scientific principles, so that we can know what the right things to eat are, what the wrong things to eat are, how to live our lives. Back in the day, the children of Israel, there were many of them that accepted Jesus as the Messiah, and there were many of them that didn't. Why do you think the people who did not accept Jesus as the Messiah missed that aspect of him? Why do you think they didn't recognize him as the Messiah? Was it because he didn't look like the Messiah that they were expecting? They wanted a political deliverer. And hey, here came somebody who could heal every injury in the army and feed the whole army. Well, he'd be perfect to deliver them from the bondage of the Romans. But he didn't. And when they figured out that he wouldn't, away with him, we will not have this man to rule over us. What if today people are rejecting healing from the Lord because it comes in a package that they don't recognize, because it comes in principles? Don't eat this, don't eat that, do this, get to bed before 10 p.m. and exercise daily and keep your body weight normal and drink your water and fresh air and sunlight. What if the principles today are not what they're looking for, and so they reject their healing from Jesus? What a lost opportunity. So let's not make the mistake that was made thousands of years ago by people who are looking for healing in a different way. Are there any other questions?
Oh, thank you, Dr. Carney. What a wonderful talk. I wanted to ask about other stages of life, though, such as infancy and children, because not all of us here even today are, adults, and even for the other stage of life, if your dietary recommendations would be different.
The question was, what about infancy? Do they thrive on plant-based diets? And yes, they do. Despite the published stories that received a lot of notoriety of people who starve their babies on a vegan diet, those always get a lot of press. But a well-planned diet of whole unprocessed foods can be good. And the American Dietetics Association, ANDI, I'm not good with acronyms, but basically the American Dietetics Association has changed its name to ANDI, and they've published papers saying that vegan and vegetarian diets can be healthy for the whole lifespan. Absolutely. And those quotes are up on my website. So that's why I have a website, because I can't remember everything. And breast milk is the best food for babies. But it's not going to last forever, and they need to be fed solids. And children are not going to be nutritionally deficient as long as they get a diet higher in fat and plenty of calories and a variety of fruits and vegetables. And I think that if you feed that baby, let's say you're starting to feed them solids 4 to 6 months, if you start with the veggies, and you're going to have a child who's going to be a much better eater and not a picky eater. And if you withhold dairy from your children would do better than the children who are fed dairy. If you withhold oil from your children are going to do better than the children who are given oil. But you're going to need to have, more volume of food and more higher calorie density, avocado and things like that for children, because their brains are developing and they are myelinating. And the myelin sheath is a fatty sheath of the nerves. So children need a much higher fat content. Guess what percentage of fat is in human breast milk? It's really, really high. But what about protein? What percentage of human breast milk is protein? It's less than 10% usually. So, human children don't need as much protein as baby cows because cow's milk is about 20% of its calories from protein. And baby cows need that for fast growth, but humans don't need it. And so your children will do better without dairy. And for the elderly, sometimes the elderly, they're socially isolated and they're just eating what tastes good and they're living on cookies and crackers. And these are highly processed foods and they could be vegan, but that's not a good diet for them. And so the elderly thrive on plant-based diets, and I'm so grateful that you gave me this opportunity because my mother is 92 years old, and my mother resisted the oil-free vegan diet message of her youngest daughter for years, but she changed by God's grace, and she's thriving and still living independently, and I'm grateful. I had a father who didn't listen, dead at 67, and I have a mother who listened, and she's alive at 92. Thank you for your long patience. I'll let you go. Unless anybody has more questions you want to come up privately, I'll be here for you. And thank you so much. What a pleasure it's been to be together.
Oh, I'd like to add one thing. If you really, and I did, got a lot from today's talk with Dr. Linda Carney. She's speaking again on Tuesday, 7 p.m. at the Alawai Golf Course Clubhouse at 404 Kapalulu Avenue. You've got the flyers for that. And if you got friends or family whom you think should listen to what she had to say today, please come.
It's free.
It's free. It's open to everybody.
At the Alawai Golf Course Clubhouse, 7 p.m. on Tuesday.
Right.
We also have an informal dine-out at Ripples by the Sea from 6 to 8 p.m. on Wednesday.
Yes, it's at, what was it?
Ripples by the Sea.
It's called the Ripple of Smiles.
Oh, Ripple of Smiles. Oh, sorry.
They want to cause smiles and everyone comes to eat there. Yes, it's a Vietnamese vegan dinner. At least one or two of your flyers there that we passed out should mention it. And you can have a really pleasant, healthy dinner with Dr. Linda Carney and also our other guest of honor, Sean Carney. And you'll get to talk with them if you like, I guess. And I think it's just going to be a fun evening. So please sign up for it if you can. Just call up Carol. The telephone number is on your flyer there. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I got my back to everybody I wanted to talk to. But thank you again. Really
Welcome.
appreciate it.
And on Maui, for your friends on Maui, there's a radio show, KAKU, and at 11 a.m. on Thursday, there'll be an interview with Sean and me on a program called Off the Record. The replay is 2 p.m. on Friday, and that's KAKU FM, a show called Off the Record on Maui. All right, thank you.
I just want to thank also Dr. Fred Foster. I should have brought a lei for you. Thank you so much. You did so much to get this going, and to the church also. Wonderful. Thank you.